All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Keener, and it's great to see you all here today. Excited to learn about goals. My name is Leah, as I said, and I'm the events coordinator at Bay Nature Magazine. And before we begin, I just want to introduce everyone to Bay Nature and our publication and our events program. Bay Nature is a quarterly print magazine that publishes nature and conservation content local to the Bay Area. But we also publish weekly online content also about conservation and nature topics that are all local to the 9 counties of the Bay Area, and we like to cover all kinds of different topics. But in addition to our editorial content, we're also working on building up our events program, and those are usually in the form of in-person outings or hikes or bio blitzes, or also in the form of virtual events like this one, where we have really special guest today, Rudy, who will be sharing about how to identify goals. Hey, Rudy. Everyone who's listening, please, I invite you to turn your cameras on. We would love to see your faces and love to see you on screen if possible. Um, and but please stay muted unless you are asking a question at the end.
We
Um,
are right now.
we're going to be doing Q&A at the very end, and so anyone who has questions, please just type your questions into the chat. And once we're done with the presentation, we'll get to as many questions as possible at the end. So yes, thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to invite or first introduce Rudy, who's our guest today. Rudy is a passionate, lifelong ecologist and educator who enjoys exchanging knowledge with others, and he's almost always found in nature, surveying for sea life in our national marine sanctuaries and other places. He lives in SF with 4 rescue birds, and he has led many gull identification classes, some with Golden Gate Bird Alliance, and others with the Richardson Bay Audubon, as well as other organizations. And he's helped to train surveyors for shorebird identification for the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, and others. So we're really lucky to have you today, Rudy, and we're really excited to have you. So
How
um,
great to be here.
yeah, thanks so much for being here and for joining. So without much further ado, I'll turn it over to Rudy to share his screen and start the presentation. And again, everyone listening, please feel free to turn your cameras on. If you have any questions, please just type them in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as possible, or we'll get to them as many as possible at the end of the program. But yeah, thank you so much. And Rudy, take it away.
Okay, so here we have a photo that was taken at Aqua Vista during a herring run where the gulls come to eat the eggs. And just make sure I'm on and you guys can hear me.
We can hear you great, and the slide
Oh,
looks great to me.
okay, good. Um, let's see, let's pull this up real quick. Um, and most people, when they see these photos of these groups of gulls, they panic. Like, I can't possibly identify all of these. So obviously, in 45 minutes, we're not going to learn to identify all of these. Um, what we're going to do is we're going to emphasize birds that are here year round. But my larger emphasis is going to be on the tools that you need to identify gulls. So let's go. I'm not sure why my cursor's not working. Um, hold on, I'm getting pop-up messages from Zoom. Okay, so gulls have a reputation. And this is from Dawson's book, and you can read some of it, how he describes them. And I'm sure any researcher that works out on Cepheid on Southeast Farallon Islands during the nesting season will agree with him. You know, much is good and all that is evil has gathered itself up into the Western gull. Rather dramatic. He goes on to describe it as the handsomest of the blue-mantled laridae. But then he says, as a scavenger, gives him a fear, which the black heart within. He's an impeccable scavenger. Uh, but a scavenger is not necessarily a good citizen. Call him a ghoul, rather, for the Western gull is cruel of beak and bottomless of maw. So you know, because they have this, you know, rough reputation, and I'm sure, as I said, researchers who go in and are banding these chicks, etc., probably will agree with this. I see what's going on. Okay. So, two things. They're like corvids. They are an opportunistic family that operates both as a predator, and we know the necessity of predators, and it operates as a scavenger. We also know the necessity of scavengers, keeping the beaches clean. Excuse me. Um, on the plus side, um, Gull divorce rates are at about 3 to 5%, I believe. Once a pair is together, uh, they're pretty much together for life, with these few exceptions. You can Google human divorce rates and sort of do a comparison, but gulls do a pretty good job of staying together. There was a analysis done of the contents of the crop contents of gull chicks, and this is at the time when uh, the dumps had open tops and gulls were coming in and foraging on whatever was available. But what they found in these the crops of these chicks was squid and fresh fish. So even though, and I believe this was on Alcatraz, so even though these birds could have easily flown to the dump, picked up some garbage and, brought it back home, instead they were out in the ocean foraging. Um, so the truth is, gulls just want to have fun, so much so that a song was written about them. And we're going to be able to identify these gulls by the time we get through this class. So what are some of the fun things you can do with gulls? Okay, besides watching them wheel about in the clouds as a storm is coming in, which is an amazing thing, occasionally you will find a banded bird. And this bird I saw both in November of 2016 and December of 2018. And with a lot of work, unfortunately, you can't do this with a cell phone. You have to use a camera that's got some zoom on it. You very patiently go around the bird and you can eventually get all these numbers and submit it to the bird banding laboratory. So this is the number 2406, etc. And I submitted it to the bird banding lab, and they sent an email back and said, "Are you sure this number is correct?" So I sent them this photo, and they sent me this. This is the thing, when you send in any banded bird, they send you a little certificate of appreciation. And zooming in, you can see that this bird was banded in June 15th of 1991, uh, which puts an amazing age on them. I know people who are younger than this. um, and yeah, so that is that's kind of a fun thing you can do when you find a banded bird. Uh, so now we're going to go over the topography that I'm going to be using. I'm not going to be using all the terms that you see here, but I will be referencing certain things as we go through the identification. So we'll start the head and work our way down. And the first term you see is gonies. And what that is that little bulge sticking out on the bottom of the mandible. And it's where the lower mandibles fuse together. Um, uh, and in some birds, it's like in this Western gull, it's very pronounced. And you'll notice that the upper mandible sort of terminates abruptly as well. And what this does is it gives the bill a certain shape. The shape of the bill is one of the keys into breaking into understanding and identifying gulls. So this is one of the things you want to look at is how excessive is the gonies and the shape of that upper mandible and what sort of shape does it give the entire bill. The next is the mantle. One of the very convenient things about having the Western gull here is it is generally, not always with very few exceptions, but it is generally the darkest adult gull here, darkest mantled one. So you can use that as a reference point because other species are going to be lighter mantled than this. There is a subspecies down in Southern California of Western Gull that is a little bit darker, but still you can use the Western Gull as sort of a touchstone gull in so many ways because it has a very large bill. Only one other bird has the bill that's kind of built like this. Um, uh, it has this dark back and it has truly black primaries. That so much isn't going to come into play in this talk, but it's good to know that that is what you're looking at for a black primaried species. And the primaries are these feathers sticking out the back here. I'm forgetting to use my mouse. Hold on. Sorry. Um, the other thing is the secondaries on the Western gull. So Western gulls have really broad wings. And so these secondaries are sticking out in the bottom. I don't know where my sticking out on the bottom right here. They're actually two-tone. They're gray here and white at the tip. And then you've got the tertials up here. The tertials are just another type of secondary that's stuck further in. So what I'm going to, and then these white spots at the end are called apical spots. Some people will call them windows. I've also heard fingernails used, but if you see me out in the field and you're asking about a bird, don't use the term fingernails. So here's a comparison of that same bird with the flying bird. And one of the things we're looking at, I'm not sure. So here are the secondaries, the tertials that are in here, and these are the primaries. The primaries are numbered from 1 to 10. And I'm not sure why this mouse is moving. Uh, there we go. So the primaries are numbered from 1 to 10, 1 being here and 10 being all the way out. The only ones I'm going to be referencing are probably primary 10 or P10 and P9, because I'm going to be talking about what's called this mirror. A mirror is not an apical spot. The apical spots are these terminal bands out here. A mirror is isolated within the black. Um, let's see. And I probably won't be referencing the other numbers. I'll just be referencing P9 and P10, primary 9 and primary 10. And again, you can see that's a very dark mantle. One of the things that we're looking at is this pattern of black up top to identify two species. So I'm going to say that pretty much I'll be referencing the bill, the gonnies, the mantle, um, somewhat the secondaries, the width of the secondaries. Again, this group of feathers here, and definitely the primaries, the primary color, and the mirror. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. I have heard people say that they thought that the black part sticking out of the end of the gull was the tail. And as you can see, it's actually the primaries in the folded wing. The tail is the white bit that's below. And this is a tricky part. There are terms, primary projection and primary extension. I have heard them used interchangeably. One is from the distance of the tertials right here. This is the end of the tertials to the tips of the primaries. And the other is from the end of the tail to the tips of the primaries again. But the thing is, I have heard them switched around the other way, and I've seen them online switched around the other way. So if someone is talking about primary extension or projection, and they're saying, oh, that's a really long primary extension or projection, just know that there's a lot of primaries sticking out from behind the tertials, or it's sticking out behind the tail. Generally, something that's got a long primary extension also has a long primary projection. I don't know how to fix that. Okay, these are goldfinches. These are not gulls. But unfortunately, you can't talk about gulls without talking about molt. And these show a really good example of the basic molt and the alternate molt. So basic molt is labor intensive, energy intensive. It is where everything is molted, not all at once, because the bird has to continue to fly. Um, but what they do is they will start with most birds, passerines and gulls, they will first start their molt by dropping P1, that inner primary that we see right here. And that is in gulls what we call the start of the pre-basic molt. And you can see these two birds look dramatically different. But to get to this alternate molt, all this bird has to do is grow in yellow body feathers, which is not as labor intensive. Two reasons: black contains melanin, and that requires an awful lot of energy to produce those feathers. And then secondly, just the strength and thickness of the flight feathers. So to get from this basic winter type bird into the spring alternate molt, what's really happened here is it's lost the fringing on the feathers here, which turns them all black. So all this bird did was brighten up its soft parts, which are the bill and feet, and grow in these body feathers. So that is, and that is one thing I'll be talking about is, so here's what you need to understand is that the basic molt, the pre-basic molt or basic plumage is a result of everything being changed out, including the flight feathers. So each cycle then of gull, and we're going to discuss cycles and ages in just a moment. I use the term cycles, and what you have is you have these first cycle birds, which are the ones that were hatched this year recently. You have adult birds, which most people know is just the white-headed gulls with the gray back and the white tail. Second, so those are the two that we're going to focus on for this talk. For a point of reference, I'm not talking about the other two because you can kind of extrapolate. In their second cycle, they look very in between. They've lost the black bill. They're starting to get, the black is just going to the tip. They still have an all black tail. They're starting to get their gray mantle feathers in the back. They're starting to get darker black in the wing feathers. So they look to be about midway in appearance. That's why I put this dot here in the middle. I'm not sure why my mouse keeps bouncing in and out of view, but it does. So I put it in the middle here. In the third cycle, they've almost approached the appearance of an adult. But as you can see, the apical spots are not very well developed. There's still black in the tail. There's black on the bill. And so the reason I'm not going over these two cycles is because you can extrapolate a little bit from in between. So here is well, that's not quite a Western gull, but we'll say that these are the four cycles that you're looking at in a standing bird. So you get these very dark brown hatchier birds. This one looks great because he's freshly molted and freshly out of the nest. He's also using that begging posture that chicks do. And this is in August. And this is the second cycle. And you can see that it's sort of midway through. The primaries are still brown. It's got the gray mantle feathers starting to come in, and then it has an excessive amount of black on the end of the bill. And then here in the third cycle, this is like a little early on the third cycle. You can see it's almost there. It still has a lot of black on the bill. If you could see the tail, it's going to have black on the tail. The primaries are black now, but they don't have the apical spots of the adult. And you can see in all of these birds, which are all Western gulls, that there's that enhanced gonnies, and they have what's called a short primary projection. So when was this? I think this was put in the Auk in 1920. And in a perfect world, yes. So broken lines represent periods of molt, and solid lines indicate stable plumage. One thing about being out on the ocean, you're constantly exposed to sun, you're exposed to the reflection of sun, you're exposed to salt water and winds. So gulls are pretty much always molting. And what But this is like a valiant try. Like putting this graph together was amazing. So what you're seeing is you're seeing like starts out as an egg and it goes through certain ages. And then right about here, it drops primary one. And that's where, if you use the cycle system, that bird has then gone to the next cycle. Now, I know in books and from other people, you have learned different aging methods. And so my pal Xander from the Beach Watch program, he took one of my first Gull classes and he modified this. And we had talked about it. And so it shows here the quadrants show the different seasons. The color quadrants show the different seasons. So blue is winter, yellow is summer. And the black squares show the month. So what you're looking at here is um, there are three systems, which makes it kind of a little complicated. You can have hatch year birds, which then at midnight, stroke of midnight, and it becomes January 1st, all hatch year birds become second year birds. And then those second year birds, again, going back around to the top of the chart here, they become third year birds and then fourth year birds and then adults. Oh, I wish my mouse would not keep disappearing. Uh, Come on. There you go. In the season, you've probably heard like second summer. So what you're looking at are second winter. So here's the egg hatching. It goes into its first summer, comes around, goes around again, and goes into its second summer um, over here. You've also heard the term second winter. So what you're looking at on this chart is sort of three different systems. At this point, you're looking at first, second, third, fourth cycle gulls, and then from fourth cycle on, they're adults. And you're also looking at, so first winter, second winter, etc. I'm not going to go too heavily on this because you can look back at this at the video that they're going to post later. So I am going to zip through a few things quickly. This one is rather confusing. What I would say is work out an age system, pick one and stick with it, whatever works for you. You can always change it later. I go by cycles, but I help groups that often go by the year, first year, second year, third year. And so I have to go back and forth in my head. So it is possible, but just pick a system and go forward with it. And this is a tells you something about the difficulty of molt within gulls. So the molts of most gulls are complex, protracted, and variable, even within a species. Good thing to know. So expect a certain amount of variation within gulls and their appearance. We're coming up to a time where it's kind of ideal to look at gulls because they're sort of like they look like you would expect from like a first cycle or second, third, or fourth adult bird. And December is just a really great time to look at them. We've also got other gulls coming in, mixing in, which is another good reason to learn these California and Western gulls. So this mentions that adults of all North American gulls undergo a complete definitive pre-basic molt that begins shortly after breeding, primarily in June or July. So one of the things that could possibly change about this graph is this line is actually curved. First cycle birds do drop that first primary earlier in the month, like could be anywhere between March, like April and May. And then as they get older, that first primary dropping becomes later in the season. So when these birds fly over, you're going to look for a gap and just get an idea of how old they are. Okay, so quiz time. So this is where we're going to use our chat. And all I'm asking here is to see if you guys can identify first, second, and third cycle birds. And So you look at this. This is actually a California gull. And what cycle do you think it is? Go ahead and answer in the chat there. Let me see if I can figure out how to pop up the chat screen.
It looks like we have a lot of people saying third,
Third, yeah.
saying second.
Okay, so this is a second cycle gull. The difference is, remember how the third cycle was almost an adult? This bird still has a lot of brown on the wing coverts right here, a lot of brown in the tertials. These are not yet black, and there's still like some black on the bill. So you're looking at a second cycle bird here. Remember, it's right in the middle in production between a very white-headed, gray-mantled adult and um, the very brown patchier bird. And uh, there we go. So here's an arrow. It just shows you some of those pointers that I was just mentioning. I don't know why I stuck this California gull here. Um, okay, what cycle do we see here?
I'm seeing mostly people saying third and a couple fourths. Yeah,
Right.
third.
So no black on the bill. The head is dark, but here's one thing I didn't mention. So we talked about basic and alternate plumage. Another nice thing about the Western gull is that in basic plumage in the winter, they're going to be predominantly the only white-headed gull, other than Heermann's gulls, which are very distinctive. All the large Lara species, like the California gull, the herring gull, all of these birds, they get this shelling on the head, this dark, smoky head. When they go into their alternate plumage, they molt in white feathers, but then we don't see them. They've gone off up north to breed and nest. But when they're down here for the winter, when they first arrive, they will sometimes have a white head. So, but you can see this is in January, so he's well in, or she rather, is well into basic plumage. So this is an adult bird. There's no black on the bill. There's no black on the tail. Those are probably the two things you're going to want to look for. And the reason I'm emphasizing these cycles is because when you're IDing gulls, you want to compare adults to adults. To compare an adult of one species to a hatch year of another species is a little complicated. And once you get some practice, then you can compare attributes, but it's better to look at adults. I would say when you're first learning gulls, ignore the second cycles and third cycles and really focus on the adults and the hatch years. First, the adults. Okay, these two birds are a species we're not going to discuss. Ah, yes. Um, Uh, we'll tell you what, we'll do this one. What do we think? What do we think this cycle is? This is gonna be our last one.
People are saying four so far, third, four
Let's
so
go
far,
for
more
three.
four than three.
Someone they asked, I have a bird flying around my house.
I'm seeing mostly four, some three, a good number of three as well.
Yeah, so good. David there has it right. This is a third cycle bird. It's almost an adult, but it has this a black on the bill, and something you have to be careful with. This is a Western gull. In the wintertime, uh, California gulls do get a little black on the end of the bill. Um, so don't be fooled by that. I've had people fooled by that. But yes, so he's got, you can just make out a little bit of black in the tail and does not have apical spots. These are fresh primaries. for the time of year, but there's no apical spots there. So an adult is going to be a little more advanced. But this is a perfect example where you can take a third cycle and still work out what it is because it looks so much like an adult. So I'm using fourth cycle and adult interchangeably because if you grab a bird, you might be able to find some like fourth cycle feathers, like some dark feathers in there, and you might be able to get it all the way up to age 6. But generally out in the field, once these Laras are fourth cycle, it's hard to tell how old they are. They could be 20 years old, like that bandit gull. Um, Okay, we're going to see. Okay, unfortunately, this is a bird we're not going to be able to have time to discuss. This is a glaucous-winged gull. And we are going to see those here this winter. They're very common. You'll notice that it's got a pale mantle and that the primaries are the same shade as the mantle. Um, California gull. This is an adult. Notice, like, again, this gets a little black pattern on the bill here. But otherwise, and it gets the shelling in the head for the winter, that shading or hooding. This was actually supposed to be a trick question. What cycle is this? In March, this is a first cycle bird that's about to go into its second cycle. It's starting to get gray on its back, and all the juvenile feathers are really worn. But let's go to, okay, so end of cycles. So when you're scanning a flock, there's you want to look for all those things. You want to look first, you want to look for mantles. No, I take that back. First, you want to see who's separated. If you're at the beach and the birds are all standing, you'll notice that Western gulls and California gulls are pretty close in size and they'll stand side by side, but other guys will separate themselves out farther on the edges of the flock. And then the second thing you want to scan for is mantle color. And again, you're just focusing on the adults and the hatch years. So here's a Western gull, an adult, and you can see they're large birds. You look at this bill, there is sexual dimorphism. Where males are larger, they're flatter headed. They've got a flatter head. They're larger build. Um, they're beefier. They're beefier in structure. So this looks like a pretty good adult male Western gull. This is probably exactly fourth cycle. You can see a little brown in the gray, mixed in the gray. You can see it's a big bird, that it also has a large bill. Black primaries. And this is an example of variation in size amongst species. This was over at Lake Merced, the concrete bridge. And you can see that that one on the right is massive. And I was trying to get that other one to move closer to it, by walking in. So it would get closer, it just refused. And quite frankly, I don't blame it. But yeah, this gives you an idea. And you can even get smaller ones that are a shade smaller. So don't let size fool you. That you want to look at plumage features and bill shape. Use size for like smaller species. Okay, so we've looked at Western gulls, and you can see they have a great big gonadial, that really massive gonadial. Oh, my mouse. There we are. You can see that the upper mandible terminates abruptly, and the bill is kind of dopey looking. It's big. It's got a dark back. You can see how let me move this chat out of the way. You can see the mantle color, and then you can see that it has a relatively short primary projection. And one of the important thing about learning and identifying gulls is go, okay, I've told you this is a Western gull. Now really look at it and even look at groups of them and look at the variation, look at the size of the bill, look at the shape of the bill, look at the length of the primaries, look at the shade of the mantle on the back. And you have to train yourself to do this. You'll see me out in the field watching Western gulls and California gulls through my binoculars as they fly away, because sometimes that's all you get is that little bit of flying away. Okay. So this is a California gull. It's in breeding aspect, we'll call it. It's starting to get the dark feathers in the head, but it's still got this bright bill and brightly colored legs. And it has a really long primary projection. Look at how far these wingtips stick out past the tail, much farther than um, a Western gull. You'll also, off of there, you'll also notice that the primaries are a little bit crossed. The big species like Western gulls and herring gulls, they have shorter wings and broader wings. They will occasionally cross their primaries. But these longer wing species will almost invariably, when they're sitting on the water, will sit with the primaries crossed. Um, so you'll notice that little bit of black at the very end. That's typical for these birds that are year round, actually. So don't be thrown by this. This is a classic adult California gull, and you can see a little bit of yellow legs sticking out. Here's a little detail of the bill. It's got very large gonidial spot, which it turns out is not the thing that triggers chicks to eat. That was something I was taught when I was a kid. You know, the chicks peck at it, and then the parents respond with food, and you can just make out this bright yellow leg sticking out. And soft parts do change throughout the season. In the winter, when it goes decently into the winter, this bill will become dull, and those legs actually take on this sort of greenish cast. Okay. Again, California gull, you can see that very parallel bill. The upper mandible has this sort of longer attenuated shape. It's got a bit of agones, but the beginning part, the proximal part, is very parallel to each other. And that's one of the hallmarks of California gulls. And you can see it's getting the speckling in the head that they do in the wintertime. This is a hatchier California gull. And one of the convenient things about them is, as opposed to the black-billed, all black-billed Western gull, within weeks they get this bicolored bill. There is another gull that's very similar to this, but their bill generally stays black until the second cycle. Um, so here you can compare it to a first cycle um, Western gull, and you can see it's got the larger bill, it's got the shorter primary projection. Here, I'll just back up. Here are the two of them together. And you can see the very long primary projection on the California gull, the two-tone bill, the bicolored bill. And this is a really great comparison between these two species that are here year-round. I would really strongly suggest just going to a place where the gulls congregate and start looking for these differences. Again, California gull, long primaries. This one's just fresh out of the nest, so the bill has not yet changed. It's pretty rare that you actually will see this is in July, you will actually see a California gull with an all black bill. They change so quickly. And again, another Western gull, short primary projection, big dopey bill. Also, they have the muddiest appearance. Their coverts are not that speckly. Their body is very like sort of, smoky. Same. And here's a comparison of a third cycle Western gull at the top. Notice there's no apical spots. And a just fresh out of the nest California gull. In flying birds, this is another diagram that Xander came up with. In flying birds, we're just focusing on the ones with the red arrow. I don't think we're going to get to glaucous wing gull, which is at the bottom. You can see in the Western gull, which is here, that the way it was once described to me is, imagine the tip is dipped in paint and then someone smeared it into the wing, sort of like dry brushed it into the wing, so it goes all the way in. There's no clean demarcation In when with Western gulls, these are adults when they fly over. In California gulls, these mirrors, which is what you call those, are probably a hair too big. But this shape right here, I call it like the Star Trek symbol because you can see it's a bit longer on this side and thicker. Um, they're that's one of the ways you would identify them because they have this really clean demarcation. The outer primaries and the outer primaries, I'm still trying to get my mouse to work. The outer primaries and the secondaries are gray, but I have found that at elevation, they appear white, which makes that contrast even starker. We will be discussing, hopefully be discussing new gulls. One of the things about them is they do have black on the tip, and let's just visit that name for a moment. When they were made their own species, the name was changed to short-billed gull, and they short-billed gulls, and they kind of go back and forth um, uh, between those names. And they when they split the species, they went with short-billed gull, which is a name I cannot tolerate. So I use Mew gull in your current guidebooks. You're going to find them short-billed. I don't think I'd be able to change the habit. I've heard there's people who are working on changing it back to Mew. I hope so. Anyway, they have a very large P10 and P9 mirror here. And so when they're flying over, you see these big mirrors taking a huge chunk out of the black. They just take up a large amount of real estate when they're flying over. So you can see here's a Western gull with exactly the features I'm talking about in the wing. Sorry, mouse. That the black has no clear demarcation. Here's a flyover California gull. Here's that Star Trek symbol I was kind of talking about. This P10 has not grown in all the way, and something to be aware of. The birds that are arriving, a lot of them have not finished growing in P10. Normally that mirror should be farther out, just a little, like an inch farther out. And it does change the shape a little bit when they're growing in those outer primaries, but they're just wrapping it up. So by December, we should be good. Here's a close-up of the Western gull wing. This is a bird we're not going to have time to discuss. This is a glaucous wing gull. It's a pale-mantled bird that comes up from the north, and it also, you'll notice that the primaries are the same shade as the mantle. Here's the gig. Because they're on the west coast, Western gulls and glaucous wing gulls will hybridize, and even within the first generation, those chicks can appear anywhere on the gradient between either of those two species. So if you see a glaucous wing gull with darker primaries but a pale back, or if you see a Western gull that's got a kind of a light mantle and the primaries aren't quite black, then you can suspect this very typical hybrid that we see here in the winter. Um, glaucous wing gull. Glaucous wing gull. Here's the first cycle. And again, you can see it's just this monochromatic gull. And that is one of the good things that you can use to pick them out. How are we doing for time? Okay, I think we're going to have to go a little faster. Um, very quickly, there are 3-cycle gulls here in their first cycle. They look very scaly and beautiful like this. Note the super long primary projection. These birds can float on the air. In their second cycle, they almost look like an adult because they're going much faster than the 4-cycle birds. And here you can see a 3rd-cycle bird with an adult. And you're thinking, well, what is this doing up here? Well, this is how far one of these birds will progress in the course of a single season. So these are both 1st-cycle birds. This one is much earlier and this one much later. Although I'm looking at the date in September, I'm thinking now this is a 2nd-cycle bird. But this is the degree that they will change in that short amount of time. So there we have Mew gull and very long primary projection, very cute, round-headed, dove-like look. Here you can see those apical spots are taking a huge chunk out of the black at the end of the primaries. And if you ever see birds on a telephone line, those are Mew gulls because no one else can do this. They're not tiny enough. Here's a 1st-cycle Mew gull. and they're just lovely. This is the freshest one I've ever seen. The fringes on the ends of all the coverts are there intact. Beautiful bird. Stopped to take multiple pictures. Um, you'll note here in the stretched out wing that the primaries go from a sort of a soft brown to a very pale window inside, and it does it in a gentle gradient, which is important. Um, uh, and so, yeah, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Here's one with a Western gull, so you can see the differences in the patterning, the bill size and shape. Here is a first cycle bird. It's already getting in its gray mantle feathers in February, progressing much faster than the three cycle birds. Now, ringbill. How can you possibly confuse a ringbill with a mew gull? They look totally different. You've got the mew gull up top, you've got the ringbill at the bottom. But you'll notice the eye shape in the bill is different, but the eye is in a slightly different position. So mew gulls have this sort of like pigeon-like appearance, and ringbill gulls have more of a glaring appearance. But in their first cycle, this is how ringbill gulls look, and you can see how similar they are to mew gulls. But remember how we had that sort of gradient in the wing on the mew gull? Ringbill gulls have a really sharp contrast. Mugos have an all brown tail. Have an all brown tail, and ringbill gulls will have some sort of band. They also have really black primaries that contrast really sharply. There's a sharp contrast between the inner and outer primaries, whereas mew gulls are muted. See, that's why that works. Mew gulls are muted. Ringbills are contrasty. Whereas if it was short-billed, then that mnemonic doesn't work anymore. So here's a quick look at different flight angle. You can see that amount of black. And don't just look at one feature. Look at how small the bill is. Like once you see this and you're like, oh, big mirrors in the tips of the wings, look at the bill. Look at how it's flying. Keep looking at the bird. So we saw these birds at the beginning. This is the advertising flyer. Leah did a really good choice here. Does anyone have any idea what cycle and what species these birds are? This could be your last question. Let's see what we have. So you can say, you know, just you could say adult Western Gull and first cycle whatever.
We have a couple responses in the chat.
Okay,
One,
people are hesitant, but someone's coming in. Yeah, okay. We'll give it 15 more seconds, folks. Okay, so remember that Star Trek symbol in the wing? So this is a California gull, and it's in breeding aspect. You have an adult kagu in the front, exactly. And in the back, you have a first cycle kagu. You've got that bill that's slender, and it's becoming two-tone right here. You can see the pink coming in. You wouldn't see that in a first cycle Western gull. Okay, so let's hop over real quick. I just want to quickly mention sources. And Leah, I'm going to wrap this up in like 2 minutes for questions.
sounds good.
Um, you can pull up any kind of gull in imnaturalist.org. You can filter for California up here. Another excellent resource is you can go to Macaulay Library, which is all the photos from eBird get loaded up here. And so here's a California gull. You can look at all the cycles. You can also filter for the location. So you could just punch in California, and it will show you all the photos taken in California. And if the person has tagged their photos properly, which if you upload photos, please tag your photos, whether they're adult, juvenile, male or female, if you're able to do that. And so now you can see it's filtering out and you can take a look. This is not a California gull, I'm pretty sure. Just a guess. You can start looking at like immature California gulls. It's an excellent resource. Okay, that's as far as I think we can get. I was hoping to cover books that I use for resources, but that's going to have to be another time. Let's close here.
Oh, Dreyfus once wrote from Devil's Island that he would see the most glorious birds. Many years later in Brittany, he realized they had only been seagulls. For me, they will always be glorious birds.
Well, if you want to sing out, sing out.
Okay, I think I turn off my screen sharing now.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much, Rudy. This was awesome.
I wish we had time to cover more ground, but there's only so much you can do in 45 minutes.
Totally. Let's see. We have a question from Trisha. Trisha, do you mind unmuting and asking your question? And others, if you have questions, please just drop them in the chat and I'll get to as many as we can before 1 p.m.
You can tell I'm a total newbie. Why do birds change the colors of their feathers? Is it to signal when they're ready to breed?
So those 4 cycles, that's more of a developmental thing. Um, for almost all birds, the first feathers that they make are actually very poorly made and they wear very quickly over the course of the season. You'll notice that say after they've gone through a year, that hatchier birds or younger birds all look much more worn than adult birds, which have had the time and energy to build proper feathers. There's actually a difference in how they're woven together. Like adult feathers will be very tightly built, whereas if you look under a microscope, juvenile feathers will have these large openings because their goal is to just to get up in the air. So they're making these feathers very quickly. They don't have time to molt one feather at a time. Remember we talked about P1, P2, P3? Well, they start dropping them 1.5 at a time. So they'll drop one, get it about halfway, and they'll go to another one. Birds in the nest don't have the chance to do this. They have to grow all their feathers very quickly. So they don't have as much melanin. They're not pigmented the same way. But the other thing is, yes, there is that alternate basic thing that they go into these brighter, more attractive colors, but also their soft parts will become brighter. The bill will become brighter and the legs will become brighter. And it's hormonal. It's the, nesting season time. And, they will do that for a short amount of time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for your question, Trisha. Does anyone else have questions that they want to drop in the chat? Otherwise, I also had one. Rudy, you had mentioned that
Yeah.
the bill spot, it was debunked. It's not actually used for, the chicks to peck on to trigger like food. Do they know what it is used for and what that purpose, like why there is those?
No, there are so many things in front of our faces that we don't know about. I imagine, I imagine as part of the breeding process, like making oneself look more attractive. I think that's true anytime you have some sort of coloration. It usually serves as some degree of an attractant. Um, but I don't think they've worked out like if it has any. But yeah, they did work. I think what they did a test where they had chicks in a box and they would stick in a fake adult head for food, and I think that's how they eventually worked out that that was not the case.
Gotcha. Thank you. And we do have a couple minutes left if you don't mind. Like, do you mind sharing some of the books that you do use for
Oh
reference?
yeah. So okay, but let me know when. So quickly. Oops. Sorry. Come back here, mouse. Okay, so very quickly, Stokes guide. They use photos, and you can see these comparisons. Here's like the glaucous-winged gull, all one color throughout.
Perfect.
The Peters. Oh,
Do you mind sharing? I think, do you want to share screen or
oh, oh, oh.
let's share? There you go. Perfect.
Hold on, my share screen. Hold on, I think I have to exit. My share screen tab is not coming up. Oops. Hmm, I see. Okay, you can see that?
Yes, this looks great. Thanks.
Um, okay, so some of the books I use. This is Stokes. You can see comparisons between the different cycles. Here's a glaucous-winged gull. You can see how it's all a monochromatic gull. This is Peterson. I wouldn't recommend them using them for sparrows, but they have this fantastic section where you can see there are actually two cycle gulls over here on the left, and then the process of a three-cycle gull and a process of a four-cycle gull. And then some of the comparisons you can see in the bills and the heads where you see these same ages side by side, which I love that, where you're comparing apples to apples. Here are adult gull comparisons. Again, fantastic. You're seeing the adults side by side. There's this older book by P.J. Grant, which is all black and white photos and line drawings, which again, here's the comparison of the different cycles of California gull. Um, Steve Howe, The Gulls of the Americas, and John Dunn. Difficult book to get your hands on, but it's really great in the way that it shows the cycles of all of these birds and goes in depth into them. One book that I really like is the National Geographic Guide. And here you can see these side by side line drawings that show different birds where you want to compare certain species. Like here's a really good example of just looking at Western gull, California gull. If we just look at those two, those show the differences that we're seeing between those two species. We never had a chance to talk about Heermann's gull, which is a shame. They're absolutely magnificent. In the winter, they look like this, and in their breeding season, when they arrive, they look like this. Thayer's gull, we didn't get a chance to. I have this book from Europe that has just amazing detail in it. Like they have packed so much information in a small amount of space. Um, I could go on about this, but there's no time. And lastly, you can I think you can still download this from Bay Nature. You can definitely download it from John Muirlaw's site. It's a single page that you can take out in the field with you, and it only shows the different cycles, only single photos. I wish it had space for open wing, but you can see the comparison of all the different species. This is a great resource right here that was put together. And I think that's it. Here's a detail, just to zoom in and give you an idea of some of the things that you look for in the different species of gulls.
Awesome. I'll look for that as well and link to it in the recording if I'm able to find it to those of
Great.
you who are
Okay.
listening.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is terrific. We had one last maybe like 20-second question from
Okay.
Laura wondering about what are some of your favorite spots to go looking for gulls?
Oh, yeah. So I'm lucky. I live next to Golden Gate Park. So I just have to go to Stowe Lake. For some reason, they really like Spreckles Lake. Ocean Beach, you cannot miss. In fact, if you go from Stowe to Spreckles to Ocean Beach, you'll probably see all of these gulls. In the East Bay, there's this store where the water bleeds out and the gulls come to bathe. It's at the end of University. Does someone know the name of it? See something? Shoot, I haven't been there in so long.
Seabreeze,
Um,
is it
yes, yeah,
Seabreeze Cafe or something like that.
yeah. Sea breeze, exactly. Yeah, Wendy's got it. Hi, Wendy. Um, if you go to Lake Merced, that's a great. I've led walks there. Um, some of the points, if you ever hear about a herring run and they're coming into because they lay their eggs very close to the shore, find out where that is, and the gulls just fly in en masse to eat the eggs at low tide as the tide's going out. It's not so effective when it's coming in because then the eggs are getting deeper in the water. Um, Other than that, it's just kind of keeping an eye out on where gulls congregate.
Thank you so much, Rudy. That was awesome. And yeah, we're all lucky to hear and learn from your expertise. Thank you for sharing, and for all of you listening, thank you for joining today at noon. I think we can wrap up there, but if everyone wants to just unmute and thank Rudy, we can like unmute and thank him out loud. That's something I like to do. So I'll just count us off on 3 and we can say thank you. 1, 2, 3. Thank
Thank
you, Rudy.
Rudy.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, folks.
Yeah, I'll be sending the recording out, and thanks to you all for joining. If you're interested in more events like this, please consider joining as a member of Bay Nature, and hope to see you at the next event. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Rudy, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.